Glossary. Accessibility refers to the identification and elimination of obstacles and barriers to provide access to the physical environment, to transportation, to information and communications, and to other facilities and services. Assimilative capacity refers to the capacity of the environment for absorbing an incremental load of pollutants while remaining below a threshold of unacceptable risk to human health and the environment. Associated facilities means facilities or activities that are not funded as part of the project and in the judgment of the bank are A. Directly and significantly related to the project, B. Carried out or planned to be carried out contemporaneously with the project, and C. Necessary for the project to be viable and would not have been constructed, expanded, or conducted if the project did not exist. For facilities or activities to be associated facilities, they must meet all three criteria. Biodiversity is the variability among living organisms from all sources including inter alia, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems and the ecological complexes of which they are a part. This includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. Chance find procedure. A chance find is archaeological material encountered unexpectedly during project construction or operation. A chance find procedure is a project-specific procedure which will be followed if previously unknown cultural heritage is encountered during project activities. The chance finds procedure will set out how chance finds associated with the project will be managed. The procedure will include a requirement to notify relevant authorities of found objects or sites by cultural heritage experts, to fence off the area of finds or sites to avoid further disturbance, to conduct an assessment of found objects or sites by cultural heritage experts, to identify and implement actions consistent with the requirements of Environmental and Social Standard 8 and national law, and to train project personnel and project workers on chance find procedures. Collective attachment means that for generations there has been a physical presence in and economic ties to land and territories traditionally owned or customarily used or occupied by the group concerned, including areas that hold special significance for it, such as sacred sites. Core functions of a project constitute those production and or service processes essential for a specific project activity without which the project cannot continue. Critical habitat is defined as areas with high biodiversity importance or value, including A. Habitat of significant importance to critically endangered or endangered species as listed on the International Union for the Conservation of Nature Red List of Threatened Species or equivalent national approaches. B. Habitat of significant importance to endemic or restricted range species. C. Habitat supporting globally or nationally significant concentrations of migratory or congregatory species. D. Highly threatened or unique system. And E. Ecological functions or characteristics that are needed to maintaining the viability of the biodiversity values described above in A to D. Cultural heritage is defined as resources with which people identify as a reflection and expression of their constantly evolving values, beliefs, knowledge, and traditions. Disadvantaged or vulnerable refers to those who may be more likely to be adversely affected by the project impacts and or more limited than others in their ability to take advantage of a project's benefits. Such an individual or group is also more likely to be excluded from or unable to participate fully in the mainstream consultation process, and as such may require specific measures and/or assistance to do so. This will take into account considerations relating to age, including the elderly and minors, and including in circumstances where they may be separated from their family, the community, or other individuals upon which they depend. Ecosystem services are the benefits that people derive from ecosystems. Ecosystem services are organized into 4 types. Roman numeral 1, provisioning services which are the products people obtain from ecosystems and which may include food, fresh water, timbers, fibers, medicinal plants. Roman numeral 2, regulating services which are the benefits people obtain from the regulation of ecosystem processes and which may include surface water purification, carbon storage and sequestration, climate regulation, protection from natural hazards. Roman numeral 3, cultural services which are the non-material benefits people obtain from ecosystems and which may include natural areas that are sacred sites and areas of importance for recreations and aesthetic enjoyment. And Roman numeral 4, supporting services which are the natural processes that maintain the other services and which may include soil formation, nutrient cycling, and primary production. Environmental, health, and safety guidelines are technical reference documents with general and industry-specific statements of good international industry practice. The environmental, health, and safety guidelines contain the performance levels and measures that are generally considered to be achievable in new facilities by existing technology at reasonable cost. For complete reference, consult the World Bank Group Environmental, Health and Safety Guidelines website. Financial feasibility is based on relevant financial considerations, including relative magnitude of the incremental cost of adopting such measures and actions compared to the project's investment, operating and maintenance costs, and on whether this incremental cost could make the project non-viable for the borrower. Forced eviction is defined as the permanent or temporary removal against the will of individuals, families, and/or communities from the homes and/or land which they occupy without the provision of and access to appropriate forms of legal and other protection, including all applicable procedures and principles in Environmental and Social Standard 5. The exercise of eminent domain, compulsory acquisition, or similar powers by a borrower will not be considered to be forced eviction, providing it complies with the requirements of national law and the provisions of Environmental and Social Standard 5, and is conducted in a manner consistent with basic principles of due process, including provision of adequate advance notice, meaningful opportunities to lodge grievances and appeals, and avoidance of the use of unnecessary, disproportionate, or excessive force. Good international industry practice is defined as the exercise of professional skill, diligence, prudence, and foresight that would reasonably be expected from skilled and experienced professionals engaged in the same type of undertaking under the same or similar circumstances, globally or regionally. The outcome of such exercise should be that the project employs the most appropriate technologies in the project-specific circumstances. Habitat is defined as a terrestrial, freshwater, or marine geographical unit or airway that supports assemblages of living organisms and their interactions with the non-living environment. Habitats vary in their sensitivity to impacts and in the various values society attributes to them. Historical pollution is defined as pollution from past activities affecting land and water resources for which no party has assumed or been assigned responsibility to address and carry out the required remediation. Integrated pest management refers to a mix of farmer-driven, ecologically based pest control practices that seeks to reduce reliance on synthetic chemical pesticides. It involves A. Managing pests, that is, keeping them below economically damaging levels rather than seeking to eradicate them. B. Integrating multiple methods, that is, relying to the extent possible on non-chemical measures to keep pest populations low. And C. Selecting and applying pesticides when they have to be used in a way that minimizes adverse effects on beneficial organisms, humans, and the environment. Integrated vector management is a rational decision-making process for the optimal use of resources for vector control. The approach seeks to improve the efficacy, cost-effectiveness, ecological soundness, and sustainability of disease vector control. Involuntary resettlement. Project-related land acquisition or restrictions on land use may cause physical displacement, such as relocation, loss of residential land, or loss of shelter. Economic displacement, such as loss of land, assets, or access to assets, including those that lead to loss of income sources or other means of livelihood, or both. The term involuntary resettlement refers to these impacts. Resettlement is considered involuntary when affected persons or communities do not have the right to refuse land acquisition or restrictions on land use that result in displacement. Land acquisition refers to all methods of obtaining land for project purposes, which may include outright purchase, expropriation of property, and acquisition of access rights, such as easements or rights of way. Land acquisition may also include A. Acquisition of unoccupied or unutilized land, whether or not the landowner relies upon such land for income or livelihood purposes. B. Repossession of public land that is used or occupied by individuals or households. And C. Project impacts that result in land being submerged or otherwise rendered unusable or inaccessible. Land includes anything growing on or permanently affixed to land, such as crops, buildings, and other improvements, and appurtenant water bodies. Livelihood refers to the full range of means that individuals, families, and communities utilize to make a living, such as wage-based income, agriculture, fishing, foraging, other natural resource-based livelihoods, petty trade, and bartering. Modified habitats are areas that may contain a large proportion of plant and/or animal species of non-native origin, and/or where human activity has substantially modified an area's primary ecological functions and species composition. Modified habitats may include, for example, areas managed for agriculture, forest plantations, reclaimed coastal zones, and reclaimed wetlands. Natural habitats are areas composed of viable assemblages of plant and/or animal species of largely native origin and/or where human activity has not essentially modified an area's primary ecological functions and species composition. Pollution refers to both hazardous and non-hazardous chemical pollutants in the solid, liquid, or gaseous phases, and includes other components such as thermal discharge to water, emissions of short and long-lived climate pollutants, nuisance odors, noise, vibration, radiation, electromagnetic energy, and the creation of potential visual impacts, including light. Pollution management includes measures designed to avoid or minimize emissions of pollutants, including short and long-lived climate pollutants, given that measures which tend to encourage reduction in energy and raw material use, as well as emissions of local pollutants, also generally result in encouraging a reduction of emissions of short and long-lived climate pollutants. Primary suppliers are those suppliers who, on an ongoing basis, provide directly to the project goods or materials essential for the core functions of the project. Project refers to the activities for which bank support through investment project financing is sought by the borrower and as defined in the project's legal agreement between the borrower and the bank. These are projects to which Operational Policy BP 10.00 Investment Project Financing applies. The World Bank Environmental and Social Policy for Investment Project Financing does not cover operations supported by development policy lending, for which the environmental provisions are set out in Operational Policy BP 8.60, Development Policy Lending, or those supported by Program for Results Financing, for which environmental provisions are set out in Operational Policy BP 9.00, Program for Results Financing. Project worker refers to A. People employed or engaged directly by the borrower, including the project proponent and the project implementing agencies, to work specifically in relation to the project, that is, direct workers. B. People employed or engaged through third parties to perform work related to core functions of the project, regardless of the location, that is, contracted workers. C. People employed or engaged by the borrower's primary suppliers, that is, primary supply workers. And D. People employed or engaged in providing community labor, that is, community workers. This includes full-time, part-time, temporary, seasonal, and migrant workers. Migrant workers are workers who have migrated from one country to another or from one part of the country to another for purposes of employment. Replacement cost is defined as a method of valuation yielding compensation sufficient to replace assets, plus necessary transaction costs associated with asset replacement. Where functioning markets exist, replacement cost is the market value as established through independent and competent real estate valuation plus transaction costs. Where functioning markets do not exist, replacement cost may be determined through alternative means such as calculation of output value for land or productive assets, or the underappreciated value of replacement material and labor for construction of structures or other fixed assets, plus transaction costs. In all instances where physical displacement results in loss of shelter, replacement cost must at least be sufficient to enable purchase or construction of housing that meets acceptable minimum community standards of quality and safety. The valuation method for determining replacement cost should be documented and included in relevant resettlement planning documents. Transaction costs include administrative charges, registration or title fees, reasonable moving expenses, and any similar costs imposed on affected persons. To ensure compensation at replacement cost, planned compensation rates may require updating in project areas where inflation is high, or the period of time between calculation of compensation rates and delivery of compensation is extensive. Restrictions on land use refers to limitations or prohibitions on the use of agricultural, residential, commercial, or other lands that are directly introduced and put into effect as part of the project. These may include restrictions on access to legally designated parks and protected areas, restrictions on access to other common property resources, restrictions on land use within utility easements or safety zones. Security of tenure means that resettled individuals or communities are resettled to a site that they can legally occupy, where they are protected from the risk of eviction, and where the tenure rights provided to them are socially and culturally appropriate. In no event will resettled persons be provided tenure rights that are in effect weaker than the rights they had to the land or assets from which they have been displaced. Technical feasibility is based on whether the proposed measures and actions can be implemented with commercially available skills, equipment, and materials, taking into account prevailing local factors such as climate, geography, demography, infrastructure, security, governance, capacity, and operational reliability. Universal access means unimpeded access for people of all ages and abilities in different situations and under various circumstances.